Hi, welcome to the webinar. I'm Sophie. I'll be giving the webinar this afternoon. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes as people to start coming in. We'll let everybody get in and settle before we kick up on the presentation. Just so you know, I'll be talking today. Also, there is the lovely Abby. Say hello, Abby.
Hi, everyone.
So Abby will be helping me out by answering the chat questions and also managing the questions and answers. And we'll be going through that right at the start so you know what's going on. In the meantime, I hope you've got a cup of coffee. I hope you've got a little bit of lunch just to keep you going over the next hour. And we'll look forward to speaking to you in about 2 minutes, okay? If you have any questions in the meantime, and you can find the chat function, start putting them in, start saying hello to us. Abby's there to keep the conversation flowing, okay? We're expecting quite a lot of people to come in this lunchtime, but we are going to start promptly. Sorry, I'm just seeing everything starting to ping up. So if you are ready and you've got your cup of tea, say hello, settle down, and I'll let Abby start to introduce us in about 30 seconds, okay?
That's good.
Yeah. It's been a bit grey here this morning. I don't know where everybody else is. But I hope you're having a good day. I hope you've had a productive morning and looking forward to a good afternoon of analytics and data science. It really is the best job in the world. I always think I'm very lucky.
Oh, somebody said nice weather in Spain. Lucky you.
Oh, yeah. No, it's not. Surrey doesn't quite have the weather of Spain yet. It was glorious yesterday. Well, it's nice to know we've got people from a wider geographical area tuning in today.
Yeah.
So again, if you're just joining, hello, my name's Sophie. I'll be talking to you for the next hour, and we will finish on time. So we did promise that we'd start at about 2 minutes past. So I'll introduce you now to Abby. She'll be managing the chat function, the questions and answers, and she's just going to give you a quick overview of how the webinar is going to run. Over to you, Abby.
Yeah. So hi everyone, and welcome to this week's webinar Wednesday by the OR Society. So as you can see, today's webinar will be hosted by Dr. Sophie Carr, who is the founder of Bayes Consulting. She will be sharing her top tips for maintaining trust in numbers and statistics when working remotely. And as she's already said, I'm Abby, and I'm going to co-chair today's meeting. So Sophie's talk will be followed by a short Q&A session, which will last around 10 to 15 minutes. So feel free to send in any questions you have for Sophie throughout the webinar by using the Q&A section, which you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen. Be sure to keep an eye on the questions too, because you can upvote the top questions you most want answered. And any we don't manage to cover in the hour, we will answer after the webinar and share on our Twitter page. And Sophie will be sharing our contact details at the end of the webinar. Yeah. So if you would like to get in touch with any extra questions after the webinar, then you can feel free to do that too. We also have a few questions for you, which will come in the form of polls. So keep an eye out for these during the webinar and make sure to vote. If you have any extra thoughts during the talk, we will have a discussion taking place in the chat section. So just stick your thoughts in there. Other than that, we really hope you enjoy the webinar and don't hesitate to ask any questions you may have. I will now hand back to Sophie.
Thank you, Abby. Okay, so thank you for coming this afternoon. I know it's everybody's lunch hour, and I hope that we're going to be able to give you something that you can take away with, that you can start to use. But again, if you've got any questions for us, make sure you put them in that question and answer function, join in on the chat, and let's see what we can do together to help everybody maintain trust in numbers and statistics. I think where I want to start with, oh, she says making sure she's clicking the right button. Oh. There we go, that's what we're looking for. One of the things I think is really important is that at the moment, it's really easy to feel as though we are all separate. And when we're remote, it's quite hard to imagine that we're really part of something, part of a team, part of a community, part of something bigger. So I want to start by talking about what actually unites everybody in OR and data science. And I think there's a few things. And the first of that is that we all love puzzles. I think somebody who works in maths and data science, we really, really love these puzzles. But more than that, we often work with numbers, not just numbers, but we're often involved with numbers. And I think something that's overlooked quite a lot is quite how emotional numbers make people feel. It's ever so easy to think of art as giving people emotions. So you can talk about pictures or sculpture. But when you start to talk about numbers, actually, there's a visceral reaction, and I think that's something that unites lots of people working in data science as well. That realization that numbers such as 27% of FTSE board women are FTSE members are women, FTSE board are women, and that 60% of all startups go bust. Those are the types of things that actually generate emotions and have impact. And then ultimately, a lot of what we do is to see that we have impact for our customers, whether they are internal customers, other teams in larger organizations, or those we serve outside of our own organization. And how can we make sure that we keep answering those questions they care about? And fundamentally, right at the bottom, we don't want to let people down. Data scientists want to do their best work. They want to produce results that are trustworthy, that are robust, and that people can take away and use. And I think those three things, that love of puzzles, that belief that numbers drive emotion and have impact, and that desire to not let people down, even though we're separate, actually pulls us all together. I think something else that's quite apparent at the moment is that more than ever, size actually doesn't matter. So my little company, Bays Consulting, is a micro company by anybody's measure. There's only three of us. There's myself, there's Abby, who's here today co-chairing, and Sam. And it used to be that organisations would talk to me, and I was having these at a conference at Christmas where people going, oh, it's all right for you, you can work separate, you know, you're not really a very big company. My team couldn't possibly work remotely. We have to be together, we have to be in an office. Skip forward, and right now, there are very few teams that are all co-located in an office anymore. And I don't think that's going to change necessarily in the near time either. Working remotely has gone from being the purveyor of small companies to the norm for pretty much every company. Flexibility has suddenly become the norm. So Abby and Sam, who work for me, we don't have set office hours in the way that many other companies did. We all do the work, we all have to get the work done. Yeah, we do work during what lots of people would call office hours, but I've never had a problem with the team working earlier or later or outside what core office hours might be. And that too, that flexibility has suddenly become normal. And I think what we're seeing is that small companies and large companies can learn a great deal from each other about how you can set up these remote teams and how you can start to develop trust between people and between the numbers that you put out. Now, I think what we can say straight away is there's no sugarcoating what's happened recently. There has been enormous changes in how the world of work has moved, how analytical teams have deployed, and there was an enormous amount of adrenaline expended when teams suddenly went remote. And I think it's fair to say that everybody I know brought their A game. Everybody worked together, everybody figured out how they were going to do this. Nothing was actually perfect, but it worked. People got computers, people got access. And then actually after a few weeks, I don't know about you, but exhaustion set in for me, partly because of that initial adrenaline rush disappearing, partly because the realization that this was, well, the new way of working. This was how it was going to be. And then how do we actually manage a real change in the pace of work? We still have to deliver answers to the key questions. We still have to answer all those clients' questions. We still have to bring really great numbers and results to the table. But actually the rate at which the questions were coming in massively changed. In fact, the velocity of work, if anything, for many teams picked up. So now we're not only trying to manage and maintain trust in numbers working remotely, we're actually trying to handle a completely different pace of work. But not only are we trying to manage a completely different pace of work, we are all looking at working in a completely different way. We are looking at working with teams. Ooh, that's not quite the right slide. Where's that come from? That's where they want to be. Sorry, I wasn't expecting the boat. I was expecting the coffee cup. There we go. What we're actually talking about are people who are working in different styles. So inevitably, all the changes that have come by working from home, people are now having to manage different working styles, different working hours, different working capabilities. So how do you manage to make sure that those quieter team members are now heard on virtual meetings, because many people find it much, much harder to engage on a Zoom meeting, particularly if you've got broadband issues. And for many people, the dedicated office space at home is a sheer luxury. Now, I'm really lucky. I have a nice posh shed that I'm talking to you from my garden. I know an awful lot of people who are in flat sheds who are sitting 5, 6 long breakfast bars. How do you start to make sure that these people can actually work to the best of their ability when you no longer are all sitting in a nice maintained office? Okay, so I think the first thing we need to talk about is that flexibility. So when we're talking about how things are changing and how we're all going to work together, if we all remember that we can be a bit flexible and that it's a bit of give and take, and some people are going to be having good days when others are really, really not having good days, then we start to find those ways forward. So I'm going to talk straight off about a few things that are setting a bit of a scene, because I know that some people have been finding this hard, and I think it's really easy to look on the doom and gloom. It's really easy to focus on the fact that the teams are not together and that that's changed everything, and somehow we can start to let standards slip, when actually what we're looking at is a brilliant opportunity. Okay, we can all start to work together a bit more. We can all come together as a community to help each other. And the first thing to remember is, like, the best puzzles ever, these challenges aren't going to be solved in a day. I'm not even sure we're going to solve them in 2 or 3 months. Okay, the truth of it is, we are not sitting our GCSEs anymore. There isn't an answer at the back of the book we can work backwards from to try and work out what we should be doing. We all just have to do our best and try and work through this together. The other thing, which is really important to remember, is everyone is finding this difficult. Nobody is alone in this. So if you are starting to struggle about how to maintain that trust, how to keep the numbers going, how to keep your team together, how to keep the methods and the data and all of that, do you know what? You could always ask. There is a brilliant, fantastic OR community within the OR Society that is online. There is a community out there that you can start to reach and start to tap into to ask these questions. And these webinars are one way, but you know what? I'm sure you've all got your own professional networks internally and externally as well. And I would say that the first point of starting to maintain the trust in your numbers, if you are at all concerned, is just start to ask. Now, I've always been really lucky in the fact that when I've ever needed genuine help and I've asked, somebody's been there to help me. And that might be a cup of tea, it might have been some training on some analysis, it might have been bouncing ideas around. So if you think I can help you just by having a chat, do you know what? Please get in contact. And I'd say the same of pretty much everybody I know. If you are not sure, if you are struggling, let's start those conversations. So one of the things I think we also need to start to talk about when we're looking at trust and when we're looking at improving those numbers is there is some form of transformation going on. There's going to have to be, because what teams are now remote, but it is a fantastic opportunity to start to look at what the future of analytical teams can actually be. How can they be shaped? How can they start to work together? And that conversation has to go across all of your team members. Everybody has the right to start to shape the future of what we're doing. So when we're working on our analytics, and there are inevitably going to be changes, there will still be some things that stay the same. And what is that? Well, I'm going to go this far. The things that are going to stay the same is that you have to, as a team, continue to answer your customers' key questions. What's changed is the rate at which those questions are coming in and what those questions actually are. How, as a team, to continue to maintain that trust your clients have, whether they are other internal teams or external? How are you going to help them understand that you're the one they come to get the answers that give them the impact that they are looking for? The next thing that you need to really think about is how are you going to transform to make sure you continue to give robust answers? What is it in those processes, those procedures, the data, the methods? What has to change to help you maintain giving the answers that you've always done, and in some cases maybe make those answers a little bit better. One of the things we need to think about is that building trust is hard, but reputations can be absolutely lost in a heartbeat. So putting the time and the effort into understanding that whilst we are going to be transforming, those core things are staying the same will never ever be time that you have wasted. Okay? Now, for me, when I started thinking about how you can maintain trust and how do we do it, because we are small, we've always been remote, we've always been working this way. One of the first things I think you need to think about is, where does your team really honestly and truthfully add value? And I don't mean in terms of money. I mean looking at where your team's genuine strength is, because in the time of crisis, in the time of change, when you're working remotely like this, which you may never have done before, what you need to do is absolutely focus on your team's core strengths. Importantly, where is it that your team finds the importance, finds the value in the work that they do with each other and the work that they do with your clients? Where is that fantastic point that everybody pulls together and sees the higher purpose of what you're doing? That is what you need to find. Another way of thinking about this is, how do you, as a team, how does your team start those conversations that are really meaningful conversation with your clients? How do you go about understanding your customers' needs? How do you go about finding what it is that they really, really care about? As analysts, we all know it's ever so easy to go off and do that esoteric analysis because it looks really fun, and we could use some new techniques, and we could learn a bit of coding. But right now, what you need to do is understand if you are focusing on getting the numbers right or getting the right number, because there is a real difference. And as a team, you need to understand which you care about most. Because if you are really focusing on getting the numbers right, making sure that what you're doing is going to be giving your clients an answer that's going to have impact, that will drive everything that your team is doing together. If actually you just want to get a number out the door and you're not focusing on getting the numbers right, but getting the right number, the one that might make them happy in the short term, the one that might not be actually answering the question they really care about, well, that's a different thing. And I'm going to assume, and I might be wrong, and it's quite hard because I can't all see you listening in right now, I'm going to assume that everybody here wants to focus on getting the numbers right, because that is what analysts want to do. When you start to focus on actually getting the numbers right, we start to be able to talk a lot more about having two-way conversations. We start to be able to talk a lot more about those fundamentals that we all really, really learned at school. Because you go right back to your secondary school when you were doing your science exams, and you were taught about hypotheses, and you were taught to look both ways. Does something go up? Does it go down? What are we actually looking for? To stop those leading questions, instead of asking, did customer churn go down last month? What happened to customer churn? Have we increased sales? No, what's happened to your sales? Part of it is actually building in the time. Building in the time to start to have those meaningful conversations, to make sure you understand what's needed, and then to start to put the experimental design plan together. But you need to have those two-way conversations. Those conversations actually need to go across your team. It's really quite hard to make sure that everybody has a voice, especially when you are working remotely, and especially when some team members find it much, much harder to engage over video. You need to remember, for all of those sharing tools that we have, Some people find it very hard to read body language. Some people find it very hard to cut in across videos. So what are you putting in to make sure that that fantastic diversity you get by working as a team, the way that you can bounce ideas off, the way that everybody can contribute? How are you going to be having those conversations with your clients and with your team members when you're not together? And that can't be the same way that you did it when you were all in an office. If as a team, and I'm going to assume you all do work together as a team, if you're in that team and you still want to have that fantastic output, sit down and work out how everybody can continue to contribute in a positive way. And that might mean that you change the formats on a weekly basis about how you have those brainstorming ideas. There is no virtual water cooler chat or a coffee queue chat anymore. You have to schedule in those random breaks, those little chats with people. If it's not over video, can you actually phone somebody? Can you do that? Can you start to get their input without them having to be on a face-to-face Skype, Zoom, whatever it is? I think the other thing when we're talking about conversations is to start to focus on what and how questions. So within the team, and even with your clients, if you want to maintain that trust, start those two-way conversations of what's working well, or what isn't working well. Nobody wants to hear that, but there might be real blockers. How can we do things better? What would that look like? And how can we change our processes, our procedures? How can we start to move things forwards to get to the point where everybody's in a better place? Because if the client really believes and trusts you that you are actually trying to make things better, and the team is all together that they are trying to work towards making their lives simpler, to making things more streamlined, to making it more efficient, actually your ability to do the deep work, because that's what data analysis really needs, the deep work, becomes easier. I think when we're talking about these questions and these conversations, what you need to remember more than anything, especially when you are remote, is that it is absolutely impossible to over communicate. There are a million different sharing platforms. So you can talk about video conferencing, of whether you're on Zoom or Skype or Teams. There's all the messaging ones. There's Slack. You can do project management on Alsatian or on Trello. We use Trello quite a lot. But equally, if you're doing code, you've got your Jira accounts, you've got your Alsatian accounts, you've got GitHub. I mean, the list goes on and on. But it does get to the point also where over communication can start to stop the deep work. So for years, Base Consulting has had a no email Friday policy. We don't open and we don't talk to emails on Friday. That's one day where we can switch off and do the deep work, do the technical work. We have recently also instigated a no internal Zoom Wednesday. As much as I love Zoom, and it's great, and we get to see people, and I for one really miss actually meeting people in person, there does get a point where I am now having more meetings than I've ever had. So whilst we can't over communicate enough so we're all aware what everybody is doing and we can all see the work that people are doing, there is a balance to be struck with letting people do the deep work. Because as much as I hate to admit it, statistics and data science at times can be repetitive, and others might think it's a bit dull and boring and a bit hard. I quite like that. I like switching all my forms of communication off and just doing the work and getting into the flow of my work, and time disappears. And so in that point, I'm not over communicating. But what I have told people in advance is that is exactly what I'm doing. If you really, really, really need me, you can phone me. But for that period of time, I won't be on any form of the other electronic communications. I'll just be working. And I value that time, and what I get done in that time is really productive. And I know that Abby and Sam probably find that the same way, or I'm possibly annoying and disappear off the face of the earth. But communicating what we're doing is absolutely essential. Now, I've talked about verbal communication and the different tools, but I think the other thing when we're talking about actually working together as a team remotely and maintaining that trust and understanding is that you have to document everything. And I mean that literally. Document everything. Nothing is too small to not document, because it's much, much harder for everybody to be able to see what's going on. So this is in many ways an absolute analyst's dream. Complete, total and utter dream. You need to create those data catalogues. You need to know what every variable means. You need to know where your data sets came from, who collected them, when were they collected, why were they collected, when are they applicable, what can they be used for, any bias in those data sets. You need to start to create logs. So who's working on what? If you've got Jira, it's who's setting up the Jira account, who's writing the stories for your Agile Scrum, coding. You need to annotate your code properly. Not just those little scribbles that you put out there, but when you've actually got to the point that you can share your code with the other team members, they do actually need to be able to understand what you've done. So you need to get into the habit of really, really annotating your code, and better still, letting see if other people can replicate your code. That's always a good way. If I take your code and try and make it run on my machine, will it work? So again, then you move on to the methods. Oh my goodness me, you need an experimental design plan, and you need to make it really crystal clear. You need to log absolutely everything. The methods, why are you choosing that method? What's the impact of that method going to be? How are you coming up with your measures of effectiveness? All of these things, which seem so small, that normally you probably would just chat to your neighbour with, or just raise it in a bit of a meeting. To maintain that trust and make sure that you're producing those robust results and that you're getting the numbers right, documentation is absolutely key. If you're like me, I'm a list freak. Everything is on a list, everything. And I am the type of person who, if I do something that isn't on my list, will then write my list and cross it out. This is what you need to do. You have got to document absolutely everything that you do, because that helps people understand, and it stops them having to try and second guess you, and it stops them understanding where things are. It makes sure they understand where things are. Okay, so the points I'm trying to get across here is, when you are documenting, the 3 Ds you need to look for is focus on your data, then the design and the development, and all of them need to be documented so people are absolutely clear. One way of making sure that you've got your documentation working is really simply to review and review and review again. But don't do it how you would normally do your review processes. The reason being is that because everything's changing, and because you're still trying to keep that trust whilst working in a different way, mix up your review process. And I think the best way to do that is to get somebody who's never normally led a review process to lead it. And that might mean it's a new member of the team. It might mean that you're giving somebody an opportunity to shine. It might mean that you are going to try a different approach entirely that the team's never used before. Give people the chance to look at it with a really critical pair of eyes. You might be surprised at what you actually learn. You might be surprised that people are coming forward with new ideas, or that you find a real flaw in what you're doing and you manage to save that trust by changing something and going back and redoing the analysis. Okay, you need to understand that when you're working remotely, that review process can actually take a lot longer than you're used to. And part of that will come down to people working different hours, to people working different time frames. So don't think that a review process can be rushed through. And certainly it can no longer be something that's just tacked on the end of a project. It has to be something that's inbuilt at every part as you're going through your work, and it has to be included within the documentation. It's much more of an iterative procedure. It's something that is underpinning all of the trust and all of the work you're going to do in getting those numbers right. Whilst you're leading on all of those reviews and you're going through the work that you're doing, the other thing that it is well worth looking at is actually data security. Now, I'm not here to wax lyrical about VPNs and all of that. It's much more about the fact of when you were all in the office, it was really easy to chat to people about who had access to what, who could see what, and now we're remote. And it's really worth spending a few minutes just looking at who still has access to your shared areas, to your shared documentation, to your data drives. IT departments have been working just like everybody else, complete overtime, to make sure that everybody has that home laptop and they're able to work and they're able to access what they need. So whilst you're it's really easy to slip into when you're working remotely, so I'll just store that and run that off my computer. I won't worry about having to access the cloud. I won't worry about having to access other information. However, as we all know, if those data sets changed, if you haven't updated your local data, well, you're going to start to get different results. And one of the things I think that's really apparent at the moment is that there is so much uncertainty. And one of the things humans seem to want to feel is some form of certainty on something. We want to feel capable. I think we want to feel competent, and to an extent, we want to feel in control. Now, there are massive things going on in the world that we can't control, but actually the data we are we are so passionate about the work we do, we're so desperate to make sure that we keep giving value and that the results we have impact. It is really important that people feel in control and can trust their own data. So when we start to talk about those locally stored versions and those that people have access to, this is why it's critical and really important to spend the time to look at this. Everybody is stretched and everybody is working really hard. And if you can help people start to feel much more secure about what they do by making sure their data is accurate and easily accessible, and to stop those small changes like the locally stored versions, you'll be doing a really good thing. You'll be helping them, and that means that they can then start to help the clients and those other people that you support. So whilst you're looking at those permissions and you're looking at the practices, you can start to have really, really good conversations with people about how they can start to improve their own competence and capabilities in different areas. And one of the ways of doing that is starting to understand within your data what can actually become self-service. So have you got data vaults that people will be able to access and actually do their own queries on? Is it worth looking at investing in how people, your team members, can actually do their own data wrangling? And I say that because there comes a point where I think currently there has never ever been more demand for training, for mentorship, and for guidance. Everybody has a part to play in this, and I am not talking about necessarily going and spending huge amounts of money on training or necessarily formal training. And the reason for being that is that if we're really, really brutal, we all know that budgets are getting tighter and tighter. There is, however, the option for everybody to reach out and offer mentoring and guidance to those who are around them, internally and externally. I'm super lucky. I've got some fantastic mentors, and I would not be able to do my job without them. I have always valued the opportunities to bounce ideas about and talk to other people. We certainly, to maintain the trust in our numbers, can keep having those mentorship and guidance opportunities. I think it's really important that we start to set up where you can lunch and learns. Can you share relevant content? Can you post about a great article you've read? My Impact magazine came yesterday and I'm sitting down reading it last night. It's really nice to be able to do something like that and then to talk about it with other people. And part of the reason that I start to talk about this is because when you think about how you were in your office, every single office has a hero. Usually it has lots of heroes. And so if you think about if you were in quite a large office, there will have been the hero who probably managed to always fix the photocopier or the printer. There'll have been the hero who always managed to make Jira set up and get your Jira sprint stories working even when nobody else could. There'll be the hero who knows how to Python code better than anybody else, or to do the R coding better than anybody else. And if you're a bit stuck, you just pop by and can you just make this work? There'll have been that person who knows how to set up the AWS servers a little bit better, how to get the virtual areas set up. Those heroes are still there and they are still working flat out remotely. But we can't rely on our office heroes in the same way, because otherwise they're going to be completely overloaded and they're not going to be able to do their own deep work. So when you start to look at the training and the trust, how can you help everybody become their own little superhero? What is it that your team needs to be able to do more by themselves? Because it'll make them feel good and it'll take the reliance off those heroes, who I've generally found are very reluctant heroes and don't realise how much everybody values having them in the workplace. And I don't think they are often aware of how much they are appreciated. So you could probably start just by telling them that. Getting those numbers right, the output that your team has, was integrally underpinned by the heroes, by everybody helping and working together. So now we're all remote. What parts of your procedures, what parts of your policies, what parts of your analysis can either be automated, can be outsourced, or can be made self-service? Which bit of that can we start to work together? And the heroes will probably run you a lunch and learn on that. What can be done to start to make everybody actually have more time to do that deep work? Because nobody, absolutely nobody, sets out to deceive and get the numbers wrong. But what we need is to support each other to get the numbers right. And it's not easy, but it's not impossible by any stretch of the imagination. I think one thing that I've really come to value working remotely is that there is an awful lot to celebrate in working apart, that you can still have an incredibly strong team, a really strong team ethos, and you can still all pull in the same direction. You can actually celebrate diversity a lot easier when you're remotely, I think, in some ways, but it takes a different way of thinking about how you can celebrate that diversity, of making sure that everybody gets a voice and of making sure that everybody has their own way of inputting. There's not going to be one solution fits all for every team to make sure that they continue to get the numbers right. You have to work to find your own purpose, your own strength, and your own sweet spot in how you're actually going to do that. I think in the current crisis, what's come about more than anything is that crisis brings clarity, both personally and professionally. People have become far clearer, I think, on what they enjoy, what they really like doing, and how professionally they can actually start to make a difference. Getting those numbers right is something that, to me and my team, matters a great deal. How we do that remotely has developed over 5 years. We've been a company for 10 years, but doing this remote team working for slightly less time than that. Teams work fantastically well when given the opportunity to do so. You've just got to start to work together to do that. So when you are coming up with those tips for how I think you can start to maintain trust in your numbers and your statistics, just to go back over them. Firstly, you need to make sure you understand where you are adding value. So how do you answer those questions that your customer really cares about? Are you answering those questions that are going to have impact on your customer? And how are you having those conversations? Because your clients' questions at the moment will be changing at a pace the likes of which they will have never seen before. How are you making sure that whether you've got an internal or an external customer, you are not just doing esoteric analysis that is for fun? You are actually doing something that the results of which the client will look at and go, I get it, I see myself, I see my business, I know how to use that. When you're having those two-way conversations, are they cutting across all of the team members? Are you keeping all of those voices involved? Because diversity and getting everybody's voice heard is how a fantastic team pulls together to get the results out. How are you changing your working practices to make sure that everybody still feels involved? Are you documenting absolutely everything that you are doing? From the data, to the methods, to the coding, to the results. And when you're documenting everything, have you got a really, really robust review procedure in place? Because it has never been more critical to review what's going into your work and what's coming out. Are you genuinely checking for model bias? Are you genuinely looking at overfitting? Have you got a way of explaining the uncertainty? Because you can't shy away from uncertainty, it's absolutely there. What language are you using to express the uncertainty? Can it be understood by the people that you are giving the results to? If not, go back and have some more two-way conversations. When you're documenting and reviewing, have you started to look at how you can help everybody feel more capable and more competent? Review your procedures, review your policies. Look at where the data is stored. Look at who has access to the data. Look at your version controls for your data. Help those office heroes who used to do all those things that you just used to walk by and ask for. Get them to help to share, get them to do their lunch and learns, get everybody to share the content that is really important so that people can become more capable, that things can be self-serviced, that we're not overloading. So fundamentally, when it really, really comes down to it, for all of your communication channels, for all of the ways that you've documented everything, the analysts can switch off, they can find their flow, and they can do the deep technical work for as long as they need to do the technical work for, to be assured that when they give those numbers out, that the numbers are right, that they are able to still feel that professionally they are making a huge difference, that what they are doing matters, and that they are good at their job. Maintaining trust in numbers and statistics and getting the numbers right isn't down to any one individual. It is down to the team, and the team to work together to make sure that the results get out. It's not easy, and in the current climate there has been huge upheavals, but it is still possible, and there are people who will help and talk to you. I really hope that by listening to this webinar you've managed to find some great tips. I hope there's some questions to answer. What I will say is that if you want to talk to anybody any further, here are our contact details. We're on Twitter and Facebook, we've got a website, or you can email me. We'd absolutely love to hear from you. We are absolutely passionate about making sure we get the numbers right. We absolutely love our jobs. And I will now open the floor up to questions and to see what people want to answer, if there are any. Abby?
Yeah, we do have a couple of questions. So I will start with this one from Phil. So does anyone use methods to track data quality as a means to understanding the confidence in the outputs?
Okay, Phil, so sorry, Abby, could you say that again? Does anybody track data quality? Is that the question?
Use methods to track data quality as a means to understanding the confidence in the outputs.
So I think that really comes down, Phil, you can tell me, or maybe message Abby in this, in that, are you talking about actually summarising the data before you set off? Because I think that's really, really important, is understanding the data structure that you're working with. So if you're talking about, do we use methods, we use tools and techniques when we get a data set to understand missing data, to make sure that there's no pattern in the missing data, to actually look at the ranges, the variances, the standard deviations, those types. So we understand what the data looks like, which we can then use in the methods that we apply to start to estimate uncertainty. Not all of the work we do actually starts to calculate things like p-values, but we often have ranges, Bayes factors, things like that. So I think understanding the data you're working with and actually starting to find out what it's like before you set off is critical. Does that answer your question? Is that what you're asking, Phil? I hope.
I'll let you know if anything else comes through on that one.
Okay.
She'll answer the next question. So this one's from Sarah. She says, hi Sophie, do you think there might be ongoing renewed public interest in analysis and stats due to the COVID related analysis that has been published, especially the impact of COVID by ethnicity, or back to people have had enough of experts?
So I think there is renewed interest in analysis, and I think there's a renewed interest in statistics particularly. I think what has come up is the way in which statistics is presented and the way in which analysis results are presented. And I think, if anything, the biggest rise I've seen in interest is actually in the presentation of the results, to make it very clear about what the results relate to. And a lot of it actually comes down to scientific communication. I follow David Spiegelhalter on Twitter, and I listen to his podcasts, and I also listen to More or Less, the BBC podcast, on how you can actually present results. Statistics, like I said, numbers are those things that people get very, very emotive about, and it's very hard to communicate clearly and accurately. I really hope that rise doesn't go away, and what we actually see are things like the Royal Statistical Society's Excellence in Statistics Journalism Award come more to the fore, so that people are really aware of what numbers are being presented, the context, because that's often key, the context in which the numbers are being presented, and then what the results mean. Particularly, you mentioned the apparent variation in COVID on ethnic minorities. That is the type of thing that has to be presented clearly, so people can understand where the extra analysis has to be done. So yeah, I really hope it's seen an interest in statistics, and I hope it leads to better communications and actually sets off new areas of research.
Cool. Yeah, we've got another question has just come through. Okay. From Fiona. She says, hi Sophie, thank you for your seminar. How do you ensure customer confidence with the uncertainty and constantly changing environment that we live in now, i.e. as we go through COVID, the input baseline numbers changing and thus providing a different output being delivered to a customer?
Yeah, so we've seen quite a change, quite a substantial change in some of our projects, from what was first asked through to what we are currently having to deliver. I think the other thing is that we are working with very different people, because some clients, people are on furlough. So the way we do that, in all honesty, is to keep the communication channels open. We've had to work really, really hard to understand what the project needs to deliver, because in some cases there's been huge changes, and that's not always easy because the projects weren't right at the start. So I would say, from a delivery perspective, we really, really are talking very frequently with our clients to understand what it is they need and what we are delivering, and that still meets the need that they have. The changes in the data and the baseline data are in many ways harder to handle. Because yes, we have procedures and we have the models and we have everything else in place, but as the data changes, actually going back through those processes, we've got better at it. Are we perfect? No, not by any stretch of the imagination. Are we doing our best? Yes. And I think a lot of it is relates back to science communication. So we talk to our clients and explain that there's been changes in the data sets, and that might mean that we've got changes in our understanding of what that data looks like, and then that means that the numbers that they saw previously might be altering now. It's not easy, and it takes up a lot of time, but what I've generally found is that if you are truthful, and we've never shied away from uncertainty, and we've never shied away from the difference that the numbers make, it seems to be working. I hope it's working. But yeah, that's what we're doing at the moment. We are being upfront and truthful and honest, and we're doing our best with what we have. Does that answer everybody's questions?
Very good. Right. Another question.
Okay.
Sophie, so in this lockdown, the public and OR customers have been flooded with data far more than I can remember, but often the numbers have been bent, double counted, and this obviously reduces trust. How do we make it clear that OR's approach is the opposite of bending?
Oh, that's quite a broad question, isn't it? And I don't know that I have a clear answer for that, because I'm not sure it's just that OR doesn't count. I don't think statistics double counts either, and it comes down, I think, to that question of, do you want to get the numbers right, or do you want to give the right number? If you want to get the numbers right, then you're going to be really open about the methods you used, and you're going to be open about where the data came from, what was included, what was excluded, why you use that method, what's the impact of using that method, and the uncertainty that there will be surrounding any results, because rarely do results give one number. There's invariably uncertainty there. So I would say OR, data science, statistics, actually needs to go back to that straight out communication part of, this is the data we took, these are its limitations, this is what we included, this is what we excluded, this is the approach we took, why we took that approach, and this is the number we got out. Now, the complication comes in that there's actually three stories that need to be managed. There's the story that's in the data itself. There's often the story that we find when we are doing the analysis and write up. That's not always the story that would end up in the media. And managing the difference between what's written and what's done and what gets put out is a much, much harder conversation, because media sell headlines, and the RSS Statistical Journalism Award that I mentioned actually awards people who do everything that I've just talked about really, really well, really concisely, and are still presented in the news. So I think that's what I would say, is that we need to get much better at communicating what we're doing, but that context and how.
Great. Okay, we have one more question here in the Q&A section.
Okay.
From Ruth. She says, you sound as if you at Bayes Consulting all have it sorted. Was there anything that was particularly difficult for your team when lockdown started? Well,
oh, we do not have it sorted. We've just been doing it longer than a lot, I think. So interesting things that happened when we hit lockdown. So two of us have children, and Abby is also at university. So we had complications of trying to manage home teaching, online learning when Abby was much more used to that. We did not have it sorted by any stretch. What we did have in place, and what we're really lucky, was that we already had all the sharing in place. So we already had Slack and Trello, we already all worked remotely. I would say the biggest thing was, again, we all shifted our working patterns. We had to, because you can't home teach and work at the same time. That's just a non-starter. And we all had new priorities put on. So, you know, my family was shielding to make sure that an elderly, vulnerable relative could be helped if she needed it. I think what we actually did was slightly communicate more, give each other a bit more slack. But also, like I said, we never had really set working hours. It's just a case of work to get the job done. And the hours shifted and we started emailing at slightly random times, but we managed to make it work. That settled down over the Easter holidays. As people got into routines, we got better, but no, I'm glad we give the impression of having it sorted, but it's more the fact that we've just been doing it longer, and when everything shifts, we just stayed talking and just kept saying it'll be okay. There were bigger things at the start, and then making it all come together at the end. Abby can tell me if we don't have it sorted. She's probably better to answer that one, Abby.
Yeah, no, I think it was just a case for us of you got to remind yourself that everybody's facing these changes, and you've just got to give it your best shot, really. And we went with that, and yeah,
we just gave it our best shot, didn't we? And I'm sure Abby probably at times had her head in her hands because I wasn't getting back to her as quickly as she'd probably liked me to have got back to her.
No.
But we all, we were all just working.
Yeah.
So, I think we did our best.
Yeah.
It's been like everybody, the combination of the things that 2020 has thrown at us so far has been quite unusual. We've been going with the flow at some points.
Taking each day as it comes, or each week.
Yeah.
We've had to kind of adjust the way we've done things, haven't we? But
I think so. And sometimes we've managed to Skype, and sometimes our internet connections meant we were on the phone. Yeah. And sometimes when the kids were melting down, I was texting. But between,
That's actually, well, there was one poll we didn't actually get around to doing, which can kind of relate to what we've just been talking about. So I might just launch that now just to see what people think. So that is about Zoom team meetings. How well are you coping with this way of communicating?
Yeah.
Because it is a new thing for a lot of people, and, it's not always the easiest way. So it'd be interesting.
No, it's not. As we were saying, there comes a point where nobody else wants to be on Zoom any longer.
Yeah,
I would suggest. But thanks for your question, Ruth. That's a good one. Have we got any more questions, Abby, or have we managed to get through them all?
No, that was all the questions in the Q&A. So
brilliant.
Yeah,
we're even going to finish on time. I think that's fantastic.
Amazing.
So thank you ever so much. We'll leave that up. Thank you ever so much, everybody, for coming. I really hope you've enjoyed it. You've learned something. Please do stay in contact. And Abby, have you popped the link for the summary into the chat?
Oh yeah, I can do that now. And I think we'll be sharing the link to the summary of this in a follow-up email, which will come from the OR.
From the OR Society.
Yeah.
It absolutely will.
Yeah. Cool. I'll put it in the chat as well.
Fantastic. Then find us on Twitter or whatever social media you prefer. We've got the same handle across them all. Or LinkedIn. We're on LinkedIn as well. And we will we'll stay in touch. And hopefully we'll hear your stories about how you're managing to maintain your trust in numbers and statistics too. Okay. And so what I think we should do is, if we hand back over to the OR Society, Tati, is there anything you want to add before we finish this in a minute?
Nothing further from me, just to say that the video will be available by tomorrow, probably by Friday the latest, and it will be available on YouTube for 14 days before then will be only available to members of the OR Society. So we will send all this information out by email, which you should look out for, and that's pretty much it. We look forward to seeing you at our next webinar in 2 weeks' time, which is Tingent.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks ever so much then. So can I leave it to you to finish the meeting then, Tati?
Yes, I'm just going to close the meeting now. So
fantastic. Thanks so much.
Thank you for everyone for attending. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.